What if I told you that one of the greatest feats of genetic engineering in human history didn't happen in a modern lab, but 9,000 years ago in a Mexican river valley? It was an act of biological alchemy that took a tough, wild grass with kernels harder than stone and transformed it into the single most important plant in the history of the Americas. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're uncovering the epic story of maize, the plant we call corn. Our story begins not in a field of towering green stalks, but with a sprawling, bushy wild grass called Teosinte. To call Teosinte an unpromising food source would be an understatement. Its ear was a tiny spike with just 5 to 12 kernels, and each kernel was locked inside a stony shell, making it almost inedible. To make matters worse, when the plant was ripe, this spike would shatter, scattering its rock-hard seeds everywhere. For a hungry human, it was a nutritional nightmare. So why would anyone bother with it? This question sparked a fierce, decades-long debate between two brilliant botanists. One, Paul Mangelsdorf, argued that modern corn must have come from a now-extinct wild corn, and that Teosinte was just a weird, wild relative. But another scientist, a Nobel Prize-winning geneticist named George Beadle, had a simpler, more radical idea. He argued that Teosinte was the direct ancestor of corn. To prove his point, he grew Teosinte in his own garden, painstakingly ground up its hard kernels, and even managed to pop them. His most crucial discovery came when he crossed Teosinte and modern corn. The offspring were fertile, a classic sign that they are, in fact, the same species. Beadle hypothesized that the gigantic difference between the two plants wasn't caused by thousands of tiny changes, but by just a handful of major genetic mutations. For decades, the science was divided, but modern DNA analysis finally proved Beadle was right. Scientists even pinpointed the exact genes he predicted. One gene, called Teosinte branched 1, or TB1, acts as a master switch. It tells the plant to grow as a single tall stalk instead of a bushy shrub, focusing all its energy into a few large ears. Another gene, TGA1, is responsible for transforming that rock-hard kernel case into the soft, tiny cup that holds the kernel to the cob we know today. Some 9,000 years ago, an ancient hunter-gatherer in the Balsas River Valley noticed a plant with one of these lucky mutations. Maybe its kernels were a little easier to get to, or its ear didn't shatter so easily. They saved the seeds from that one special plant and planted them again. By repeating this process over and over, these first farmers didn't just find a new food source. They invented one. They turned a plant that was good at surviving on its own into a plant that was good at feeding people. And with that, they laid the foundation for every great civilization that would rise in the New World. Once domesticated, this new superplant began a journey that would reshape 2 continents. It spread northward, and around 900 AD, it found a perfect home in the eastern woodlands of North America. Here, it formed a brilliantly symbiotic team known as the Three Sisters. Corn was planted first, providing a natural pole for bean vines to climb. The beans, in turn, pulled nitrogen from the air and enriched the soil, feeding the nutrient-hungry corn. And squash was planted around the base, its big leaves, creating a living mulch that shaded out weeds and kept the soil moist. Together, the Three Sisters provided a near-complete nutritional package: carbs from corn, protein from beans, and vitamins from squash. This powerful agricultural system created an unprecedented food surplus, which fueled a population explosion and the rise of the most complex society north of Mexico, the Mississippian culture. The epicenter of their world was the city of Cahokia, located near modern-day St. Louis, Missouri. At its peak, around the year 1100, Cahokia was a massive urban center with a population of up to 20,000 people, making it larger than London at the time. At its center stood Monk's Mound, a colossal earthen pyramid that towered 100 feet high and covered 14 acres. The city's existence was entirely dependent on intensive corn farming. The fertile floodplains around it were a vast sea of corn, feeding the thousands of chiefs, priests, artisans, and warriors who built this incredible city. As corn traveled north, it also moved south, into the high Andes Mountains. Here, civilizations like the Inca became masters of terrace farming, reshaping entire mountainsides into stone-walled planting beds that prevented erosion and protected the crops from frost. For the Inca, maize was more than food. It was a tool of empire and a sacred substance. The state controlled the best lands for corn production. They filled massive storehouses along their famous road network with dried maize to feed their armies on the march. But its most important role was as the key ingredient in a low-alcohol corn beer called chicha. Chicha was the essential social lubricant of the Inca world. No festival, no political negotiation, no religious ceremony was complete without it. The state sponsored enormous feasts where chicha flowed freely, a display of generosity and power that reinforced the authority of the emperor. The success of corn-based civilizations in the Americas, however, depended on a crucial piece of indigenous scientific knowledge, a process known today as Nixtamalization. The process is simple. Dried corn kernels are soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution, usually water mixed with wood ash or slaked lime. This simple step has profound effects. Most importantly, it unlocks niacin, or vitamin B3, which is chemically bound in untreated corn. Without this process, a diet dominated by corn leads to a horrific disease called pellagra, a condition that causes dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and eventually death. Because the peoples of Mesoamerica universally practiced nixtamalization to make the dough for tortillas and tamales, they built massive empires on corn without ever suffering from the disease. It was an ancient public health miracle, but this crucial knowledge was lost during the next chapter of corn's story. In 1492, Columbus arrived in the Americas and brought corn back to Europe. The plant was a smash hit. It produced far more food per acre than wheat or rye, and could grow in places other crops couldn't. It spread rapidly, especially among the poor peasants of Italy, Spain, and France. But they only imported the plant, not the processing technology. They simply ground the dried corn into meal and boiled it into porridge or polenta. By the 18th century, devastating epidemics of pellagra began to sweep through Europe. Doctors were baffled for 200 years. The tragic irony is that the cure had been known in the Americas for millennia. It's a stark reminder that indigenous knowledge is often a sophisticated form of science. Corn's journey didn't stop in Europe. Portuguese traders introduced it to Africa, where it fueled massive population growth. Tragically, this new food source became intertwined with the transatlantic slave trade, as it was used to feed enslaved people on the horrific Middle Passage. In Asia, maize was a revolution. It arrived in China in the 16th century and allowed farmers to cultivate hilly, dry lands where rice couldn't grow. This opened up vast new territories for farming, helping to fuel a population boom that saw China's population more than double in 2 centuries. After conquering the globe, corn was transformed yet again in the 20th century, shifting from a food into an industrial commodity. The breakthrough was hybrid corn. By the 1920s, scientists like Henry A. Wallace figured out how to crossbreed specific, weakened corn plants to produce first-generation offspring that were incredibly strong, uniform, and productive. U.S. corn yields, which had been flat for a century, suddenly skyrocketed. But this came with a catch. Farmers could no longer save their own seed. They had to buy new hybrid seed from a company every single year. This new productivity, combined with chemical fertilizers, created a new reality, a literal mountain of cheap corn. American farmers were producing so much corn that new uses had to be invented for it. Today, only a tiny fraction of the American corn crop is eaten directly by people. About 40 to 50% is fed to animals in massive factory farms, producing cheaper meat. Another huge portion is turned into biofuel in the form of ethanol. And in the 1970s, food scientists learned to convert cornstarch into a super sweet liquid sugar called high-fructose corn syrup. Because it was cheaper than sugar, it was quickly added to thousands of processed foods, from sodas and ketchup to bread and yogurt. And in the 1990s, corn entered the genetic age with the introduction of GMOs, or genetically modified organisms. Today, over 90% of corn grown in the U.S. is genetically modified to resist pests or herbicides. The story of corn is filled with incredible details. For instance, in Mexico, when a certain fungus infects an ear of corn, it creates a swollen gray, tumor-like growth. In the U.S., this is called corn smut, and it's considered a disease that ruins the crop. But in Mexico, This same fungus is a prized culinary delicacy called huitlacoche, celebrated for its unique, smoky, and earthy flavor. It's a powerful lesson in how culture defines what we consider food. So, where does this leave us? The journey of corn is a story of co-evolution, a partnership between a plant and people that began 9,000 years ago. It fueled empires, became a god, and shaped entire cultures. In the modern world, it has become a symbol of industrial efficiency, a cheap raw material for everything from fuel to soda. This success, however, raises complex questions about our health, our environment, and our relationship with food itself. In a fascinating twist, scientists today are looking back to corn's wild ancestor, Teosinte, hoping to find its ancient genes for drought and disease resistance to create a more sustainable future for the crop. The story of corn has come full circle, reminding us that the past often holds the keys to the future. So what are your thoughts on this? Has our industrial food system taken this sacred plant too far? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.